She joined the Institute for Studies in Industrial Development, ISID, a public-funded national-level policy think tank working on media policy issues. Currently, she is a senior ICSSR research fellow based at ISID. Today, she will be talking to us about policy communication. So I would request Jayashree ma'am to please proceed with the lecture. Over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So we start, Gorika. All right.
Yes,
It's
ma'am.
evening time. I hope you all had your evening cup of tea. Yes or no? It is said in communication parlance, the hungry people are angry people. I hope you all are happy. And we start talking on public policy communication. I understand that you already had about 10 to 12 classes, so I'm not going to talk about policy per se, that I'm sure you become pro. So straight come to the communication. Now, communication is all pervasive, it's all over. You can change, Gorika, it's all over. We communicate with our families, we communicate with our peer group. A lot of media communicates with us. There was a time it was a one-way communication. We only heard or saw what the television was telling us, or the newspapers were, writing about issues. But we didn't even realize until a few years ago that we can see each other, we can conduct classes in this mode. So we used to say generally in the classroom that information is one-way, communication is always two-way. But see how simple it has become that at 50 places we have connected and the communication is two-way. So what really is that two-way communication? It's a process which involves a sender. Now, in our case, it's me who is sending you the information, or I'm, connecting with you. Receiver, you're the receiver, and there has to be a channel. What's a channel at the moment? We are on Zoom, which means we can interact, we can chat, we can close our eyes, we can put off, and I'll never come to know even. So channel is something very dicey. Sometimes, there could be a problem, a mechanical problem, a technical problem, as I faced. I came home running from office thinking I'll have a cool, discussion with you, and I found that the internet was not working. But thank heavens, now we have mobile phone. So I told Gorika that I'll, work from a mobile, and I'll start my, PPTs from a laptop, and you kindly change when I tell you. So things have become very simple now. But sometimes the channel, the person who is a sender or a receiver can be a little smart and not listen when he's even listening, or might say that, well, you're not audible and you can do nothing about it. So understand that communication is not very simple. It looks simple, but probably is the most complex of human endeavors. And a lot of problems happen because of miscommunication, misinformation, misrepresentation. So this is what we are going to talk about, is context. We'll contextualize communication to public policy. So what is public policy? A combination of laws, regulations, actions, policies, and a lot of other factors concerning a given issue or subject. You're very young, I understand you are in your undergrad courses, but I have no idea how much news do you consume. The empirical data says that young people are interested in what's happening around, but they may not use the classical media like newspapers, or they may not use television. They might catch the news in shots through the internet. And each one of you, I'm sure, has a smartphone and would like to be informed. So I again do not know how many policy issues you have on mind. What do you think about what is happening around? What do you feel very concerned about? What do you want to change? So when we talk about policy, we always have something which needs to be changed. And sometimes when the policy comes, the intention may be different than the public interest. The intention of, for example, the government could be to help, or maybe some other vested interest, but the people for whom the policies are made, they think it otherwise. I can't give you a better example than the farmers' agitation, which is on for the last 1 year, because the government thinks it's good for the farmers, but the farmers don't think so. And the twin do not meet. So you see that a policy which took some time to shape and was passed as a law has its inherent problems. So when you look at the last few policies initiated by the Government of India, You know about Ayushman Bharat National Health Protection Scheme, Swachh Bharat Mission, Make in India, Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana, Pradhan Mantri Ujjwal Yojana, Digital India. If you recall all these when you must be in school, you would have read about them, heard about them. There were a lot of posters and the billboards all over. And now when you, in retrospect, when you see how many have really worked or not worked, each one may have one's own, perception or based on real facts. If you see that, I was just reading the other day in the newspaper, the Mahatma Gandhi, employment scheme was availed of by 2 crore people during the pandemic, which means what? Is the minimum wage which people get, one person gets in a family in the villages, and there never were 2 crore people since the time it was on. But because people lost their jobs, so obviously something is better than nothing. They went back to homes and they availed of the Magnarega. So you have to see that communication is always in tandem with a policy, before the policy, when the policy is passed, and post the policy area. I got to know 2 days ago that so many people joined because there was a communication. Somebody from the concerned ministry would have, held a press conference or sent a press release, and the media communicated. So today we are going to talk about the role and effectiveness of communication in various stages of the policy making. So what are really some of the critical public policy issues in India? I asked you some time back, what are the issues which really bother you? I'm sure as students could be education, corruption is an issue, basic sanitation is an issue, healthcare system we saw how it dwindled during the COVID. COVID, the kind of pandemic comes once it came after almost a century of the Spanish flu in the last century around 2017, 18. And we were just not prepared. I'm not just talking about India per se, the entire world was, we got a root shock, even a country like America, which is supposed to be a place to be, rich country in every which way. But there also the health system completely shattered during the pandemic. Then there are issues of poverty. We know that in India, almost 35% people, some figures always change. I was reading, it said that 20% live in abject poverty. The people who are middle class, lower middle class, have been shunted into poverty because of loss of opportunity and jobs during the pandemic. Then pollution is a big issue. Now you are from all over the country, I'm sure, and the pollution levels vary. And we saw that, in Delhi, which is always not a very good in terms of pollution, standards. And around Diwali, it only worsened, despite Supreme Court's, decision that firecrackers would not be burned, would not be cracked, but then people did. And there was little politics in that, different people with different political ideologies. Some were in for crackers, some were not in for crackers. And very interestingly, in policy, when there's something policy, you have in media getting half a dozen people who would speak for and against, as you probably did it in your schools. And we also found, lo and behold, Satguruji, who is supposed to be a spiritual guy, he was telling, why not firecrackers? You're taking away the childhood from the children, because how we as children used to wait from September until the Diwali came to crack the fireworks. So you see, when even despite there's a policy, there's a Supreme Court ruling, but people did not, they did not abide by it in many places. Women's safety is a major issue of policy concern. Despite the Nirbhaya we had, you must be very young that time, but you know that women's safety is a real issue, which we sometimes brush under the carpet, but this is an issue which needs very critical policy decisions. Rural indebtedness. We don't realize that, being in cities, the issues of the rural, rural problems, the rural disparity in every which way. There's so many people committing suicides, even the numbers are not available, but it is a real issue. Somebody who has, taken loan of say a couple of lakhs of rupees, which we might, even a couple of, a few thousand rupees, 20, 30,000, they are not able to return. Either they go to the money lender or they go to the bank. If they go to the bank, the people come and, if they have not returned their money back. So out of, social stigma, shame, many people commit suicide for money as low in strength as 10,000, 20,000. So these are some of the critical policy issues, which in my view, there could be many more, which need immediate policy intervention. So when we look at the policy, the indispensable is communication, the most important phenomenon at all stages of public policy formation. There are various stakeholders, each with varying, please change, each with varying interests. Gaurika, you can change. Next. Sorry, I've not been telling you because I can see mine. All right. You can change. Okay. 2 more. 1 more. Yes. So there are various stakeholders, each with varying interests, aspirations, agenda, and the extent of position of power to be able to push a policy issue or not. So when a policy is being framed, it could be through an NGO, it could be through one person, it could be through a member of the parliament, member of the assembly, it could be on behalf of the government itself could do it, the party in power can do it. So you have different kinds of various vested interests or real interests. And there are people on the fringes, the marginalized communities, whose cause some may espouse either for their own sake or suppositiously to fulfill their own vested interests. 2 things come to my mind. The tobacco cultivation. I don't know whether you really look at those, at least I see it in Delhi, those 3-wheelers. Once in a while you find there are boards behind that, and there's a guy who looks very emaciated and say, please allow us tobacco cultivation, because there's a ban on tobacco cultivation. And there are, millions of people who are dependent for their livelihood on tobacco cultivation. And I'm sure these people who are impoverished, they would not be doing, but somebody is taking up their cause. It could be an NGO, it could even be the big tobacco lobbies who would like the tobacco, this ban to go. And recently I, read it in the newspapers and saw it in the television channels. The mining in Goa is banned, but there were people who are dependent on mining for their livelihood. They were doing the advocacy. So tomorrow I'm going to talk about advocacy per se, the entire session. So today I'll not discuss about that. And we spoke about firecrackers. Next, please. So communication can be seen and felt in public policy in a variety of ways. During hearings and debates, in conferences and parleys, in the editorial pages of the newspapers, in magazines, in radio, television talk shows, and now hugely on digital media platforms. And you know that there are a lot of social media influencers. I'm sure some of you might be influencers already. So anything which really bothers us, we want to bring about change. And you're seeing there are some NGOs like Change.org organization, there are others which write you emails telling you to please support a cause, which you do. Then they want you to either distribute it, or either tag in your social media platforms where you are available, or pay the amount or pay some charity to get the job going. I recall a couple of years ago, a Change.org organization asked me to please sign a petition for saving a tree which was about 500-year-old. So I was wondering why, one person's, problem has become everybody's problem, and this person has taken on to Change.org organization. So I did some Google search and I found it was somewhere in the southern part of India where probably a government building was coming, and one of the trees, which was probably I don't know which tree it was, but it could be people or it could be some other tree. And they say that this tree has been there for many generations, and it probably was coming in the way of that government building, and the decision was to fell it. So much was the power of the public opinion, which was generated through this digital media and the classic media. And afterwards, about a month later, we received an email saying, thank you so much for participating. The tree has been spared. So the government probably took a call because public opinion is important. And also there's a law in the country against felling of certain kinds of trees. And so this was diverted, it was averted. So that is the power of communication, especially when we live in a world which is without boundaries, social, economic, political, race, caste, color, creed. So there's no issue which is local per se. Every issue, something happening in Zimbabwe, something happening in America, something happening in a small village in Bihar, it becomes an international issue. And you're seeing that people are espousing people's cause. I was watching a reality show the other day. So one of these guys who was a dancer, his father is suffering from cancer, and he said he's come to dance so that he can get some money. And he was informing the people there that, after it was covered, he started receiving not only calls, but a lot of money from all over the world so that he could, concentrate on dance and he could look after his father's illness. So this is the power of communication. And when we talk about public opinion, which is, can be navigated, can be formed through communication. So you need that becomes the imperative. And you also find that sometimes in popular media also, it includes narratives woven in the storyline. If you recall, we had a very nice, interesting serial called Balika Vadhu, where they were trying to, address the issue of child marriage. But unfortunately, because of the race for the eyeballs and the TRPs, they really go astray. And you saw that the very interesting film when HIV/AIDS were just new to India in the late 90s, in the late 80s and 90s. People did not even know what it was all about. And I remember after about 10, 15 years, a very interesting mainstream film, Phir Milenge, came, in which mainstream actors like Salman Khan and Shilpa Shetty were there. So what were they trying to convey? They were trying to convey that despite the law in place, there's still a stigma in office places because the lady who was working in an agency, she lost a job. Around that time, there was a kind of a narrative that it is the disease of the people with same-sex, orientation. And immediately somebody brought out a very interesting film, My Brother Nikhil, in which they showed that even the parents could not understand and they shunned their only son, but it was a sister who came to his side, and we saw, of course, Nikhil dies in the end, but the story was woven so beautifully so that it can make a difference in our understanding, in our perception. So popular media has generally come forward to look at issues, policy issues, which have a longer, implications. Next, please. So let us look at the communication structures. Next, Gorika. Yeah. Can we have the next now? Oh, okay. So when we look at the policy structures, communication structures encompass free, plural, independent media systems, robust civil society, a legal and regulatory framework that enables the free flow of information from the government to citizens and vice versa. So these frameworks through which citizens and government can communicate and engage in dialogue become very important part of the policy making, the essential component of what is known as democratic public sphere. Okay. Let me see, are we on the same page? Can you flip it, please?
Yes. Is this the one, ma'am?
Media and public policy. Let me see. I think you have missed a few. Can you go back? Can you go back? So that I don't want them to miss anything.
Please go back.
Yeah, go back. Go back to the communication structures, which I just spoke about. Now go to the next. Communication process. Okay. Now this is fine. So communication has evolved away from its traditional focus on one-way communication for the purpose of propaganda, social marketing, awareness raising, and influencing attitudes, opinions, behaviors, to a more participatory and deliberative process of dialogue as a two-way process. Because it's a two-way process, you also get a feedback, and then you know that, and the real communication becomes effective only when the sender and the receiver are on the same page. What I'm talking to you, you're understanding the way I want you to understand and not have different perception. That is when the communication really becomes effective. Next, please. So let us see what really is policy communication now. So we can divide policy communication in the following ways. The government, before presenting a bill in the parliament, posts it in the public domain for gathering public views. You may not know, I'm sure, or you may know, it might have been taught in the class. Now, there has been a kind of I don't know if it's written, but every time the government is presenting a bill in the parliament for about a month, they put it on the net and they ask for views, reviews, and comments, observations, suggestions from the public per se. And it's not that it goes waste. They get thousands of, comments and, suggestions. Because recently I was working on the labor laws. So when I was, I'm going to discuss that case study tomorrow, how advocacy, or I can even discuss today. Tomorrow I'll discuss another case study. So I found that when there was a lot of criticism that there was no consultation per se. So when I was doing my research, I found, and it was said also in the parliament, that they received hundreds of suggestions and comments, and the concerned minister also said that almost 72% of the suggestions which came through the public domain, which were discussed by the parliamentary committee, standing committee on labor, were discussed, deliberated in a two-way or tripartite way of, the ministry, the parliamentary committee, and invited guests and discussed. And then when we asked the concerned chairperson of the parliamentary committee, but what suggestions were rejected? So his answer, we did a webinar on that. And his answer was, only the government can reply. So you can understand there are wheels within wheels, when you're involving the people, the public, how much of it is taken, how much of it's not taken. So the government, that is before presenting a bill. Second, when there's some issue that's spearheaded by some group, social, political, media, or international happening, that has policy implication. One finds information around that, which is, you can please take the next slide. Yeah, no, before that. Yes, so you find that a lot of issues are articulated, advocated about at various platforms. One of the well-known platform, of course, is the digital media and also the television. Now you find in the context of television that field report is almost become negligible. For any issue which they want to discuss, they get half a dozen people and try to have their perspective on that policy. And the unfortunate part, the flip side of that is that same people, most probably generally the spokespersons of various political parties and couple of experts who are invited for everything under the sun, as if they have knowledge of everything. So that is the flip side of discussion at the public forums. Thirdly, a policy or law has been passed and the government is informing and educating the public and other stakeholders through communication. One is that when a Parliament passes an act or state assemblies pass an act, so they notify through the Gazette. It is a must. It has to be notified through the Gazette, but not everybody is privy to a Gazette. But now, thanks to digital media available, the government immediately puts it on the in the public domain on the digital space. Two, you can go to that concerned ministry, that definitely would be there. All the discussions, everything would generally be there. And sometimes in order to reach out to the people in the hinterland, in the villages, districts, elsewhere, the government also brings out advertisements. They paid space where they would say, this is what it is. When you remember Ujjwala, when the gas was given, free gas cylinder was given to the people, or when there's something else. So the government depends both on the paid and the non-paid communication through newspapers, television, radio, so on and so forth. Next, please. So the dependence of legitimacy in public policy. The democratic legitimacy of public policy, belief analysis, however, depends partly on the state institutions being sensitive to that communication process. I just discussed with you formulas, how sensitive they are. I don't need to say any further because it is happening, it's still on. And I'm sure as sensitive youngsters, because you are tomorrow's administrators and lawgivers and lawmakers, these things should bother you. These things should interest you. And I'm sure each one of you has been reading, watching, and have certain opinions about these. I spoke to you about labor laws also. So, but labor laws, there were about 24 or 36 labor laws, both at the center and at the state, which have been merged together to make 4 labor codes. And many people realized after these were passed that they did not even know that their acts were also subsumed. So as of now, there are so many trade unions in the country, except for one. Everybody else has rejected these labor codes. And there's a lot of information which is also coming in the media about that. Now, the good or bad thing is, thanks to COVID or no thanks to COVID, once these laws are passed, generally there are the government and the concerned ministry takes a few months to operationalize those laws by making guidelines and rules. So these guidelines and rules were being made in the last 6-8 months, and a lot of parleys, a lot of discussion was being held with the stakeholders, and COVID happened. So the stakeholders tripartite meeting, which was supposed to happen in the beginning of this year, no, middle of this year. So most of these trade unions said that we want to have face-to-face communication, discussion, clause by clause, because through the webinars or through the digital space we won't be able to do. And some of the industrial states in India, which were supposed to send their comments on the rules and the guidelines, have not returned back with their comments. So this law, which was supposed to be operationalized from 1st of April 2021, is still pending. But my own view is the moment this is operationalized, it's going to be again little problematic, because many people think that it is not suitable for their interest, professional interest. So we have to wait and watch. And as students of public administration or wherever you work, so this will be of great interest to you. You can follow, and whatever learning you have had would be having in this kind of a course, that will come in very handy when you would be able to see how it is working. Next, please. So now let us look at the role, since I'm supposed to talk to you about policy, communication in public policy. So we shall have to understand the role of media, which is, you see, newspapers, radio, television, digital space. What role do they have in the public policy? So a few things are very imperative, very important to understand if we understand the importance of communication in public policy. So media sociology. Media sociology means who owns the media, who controls the media. So if you see all over the world, India is no exception, that media is owned and controlled 99% by big business houses. So what it means, when the big business houses have, say, for example, 20 factories, so 19 might be doing something else, the 20th factory is a media factory. So I'm sure as intelligent youngsters, you would have known what it means in brass tacks. It means that the media's interest, the corporate's interest will always loom large on what kind of policies are being made or should be made. And since they have the space to set the agenda, that's my next point, to set the agenda, to write what would they wish to write. So it will be a different, it will be kind of a narrative which would be corporate centric. Since I teach media, so it has become a second habit. When I read something, I know whose agenda, between the lines, the undercurrents, and very soon you'll also understand when you start, following things, that whose agenda is media setting, or is it independent? So that is very important for you to understand. It's not that a policy is very good for the people. It will be, shown or seen as such in the media, because media is, as I said, is led by, is owned by big business houses. So when it comes to the corporate sector, their interest would be supreme in their heart. And big media and the corporate sector, there's always a, I wouldn't call it unholy, but there's an alliance between the corporate center and politics. Generally, analysts call it the cross-fertilization of industry and politics. So you can imagine the politics, the political parties, not as much as the government. they also wield a lot of power. What appears in the media, what does not appear in the media is of great concern to them. And successful governments all over the world have seen media sometimes as an adversary, because media in its watchdog function, my third point, is supposed to be independent interpreter of what is happening. So nobody has called them watchdog. They have themselves think that they are the kind of fourth estate in a democracy, the other three estates being the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. So media is supposed to be an independent watchdog to look at what the government is doing, and in the public interest, question the government, ask the most difficult questions. So again, you see there's a media sociology, media agenda setting, media watchdog. How much of watchdog it is? If you're watching the prime time bulletins, you do find sometimes they talk on lapdog versus watchdog media. When they say somebody Godi media or lapdog media, what they mean is that they will do what the ideology would tell them. So these are the issues. And then the most important is media trial. Whenever an issue is in the public domain for discussion, deliberations, so media takes on the role of a jurist, takes on the role of a court and start, trial. So which is just not fair. You're seen in many, issues concerning Bollywood, elsewhere. So you find that media takes on that role. So really, it's criticized by academics, by researchers, by politicians, by others. But media, as we know, the DNA of media is that good news is no news, bad news is good news. And in a race for the eyeballs and TRPs, they would try and unnecessarily go on, elongating things which are not even required. In Hindi, sometimes they call it khelo or tano. Start playing and then, just stretch it to the limit we can't even imagine. And the audience vulnerability. Now, as audience, as human beings, as citizens, how do we know about the world we live around? We like it or not, it is a fact that we know about the world around us through the media stimuli, through what is happening around. We might make our own perceptions and opinions through, personal, understanding, group stimuli when we discuss with us. But audience are vulnerable. There's no doubt about it, because sometimes there's a laugh track. They think we are such damn fools that they'll tell us when to laugh even. So which looks very silly, but that is what media is all about. So if you may not recall, but when we had the government led by Mr. Manmohan Singh until the 2014, so there was a kind of a narrative which started policy paralysis. So somebody said there's a policy paralysis in the UPA government, which means that they were not taking any policy decisions, and media took on it, and there was nothing but policy paralysis. And we knew that what happened, whether it was true or not, is for history and posterity to judge. We all know what it is. But then this became a very important issue, and we knew there was a change of guard. Because people make perceptions. The other day I was reading, today itself, there's a very interesting article in Indian Express which says that, when public opinion, research or the findings are placed in the media, there were 30% people who may not have decided on what the public opinion says, and they take their call based on what the research could be, because everybody wants to be a winner. So this is called in politics the bandwagon effect, and the other is the underdog effect. So if you're an underdog, people are not with you. If you're losing, they say, why should I be voting for a loser? So when there's a perception is built as a bandwagon effect, so a lot of people would go with the winner, not with the loser. So media itself is very important. I wouldn't say in a positive manner. You can say media is a very important player in what happens around in the socio-economic political arena of a country. It's not an independent watcher or a watchdog, but plays along with that for its own vested interest and reasons. Next, please. So what really are the expectations from the media? Through the media coverage, events, editorials, opinion articles, citizens often learn how the government policies would affect them. The government also gains feedback on the policies and programs. So the media acts as the primary conduit between those who want to influence policy and policymakers, control the scope of political discourse, and regulating the flow of information. So media becomes very important. Whether the political class likes them or not, is only through the media they can reach out to the constituencies, to the people per se. So that is where the role of media comes. And sometimes when it goes really out of hand, you find that there's a lot of hiring and firing of the top guys. And how does it happen? As I said some time back, because media is owned by the big corporate sector, so obviously there's a nexus, there's a relationship between the huge corporate sector and the government. And during elections, I'm sure you would know that most of the funding of the elections come from the corporate sector. So you see the entire vicious circle. So who is influencing whom is not difficult to gauge. So however, time when media is highly polarized on ideological lines, any honest debate is very difficult to come by. You know, sometimes it used to be when there was one Doordarshan, so we used to call literally Dur from Darshan because one kind of narrative was there. Today, we have more than 400 news channels, more than 1 lakh publications, out of which 17,000 are newspapers. So it used to be more of the same about 10, 15 years ago. Come the digital media, everybody has a handle of the Twitter, the Facebook. Now the politicos do not generally need public relations people to announce what they want to announce. They generally go straight to the Twitter, straight to their Facebook, you know, their handle, to be with their constituencies directly. So see the difference. The media on the one hand used to be a conduit between the policymakers and the people per se. Now media sometimes is sidelined and circumvented by the policymakers to be directly with the people. I remember now, of course, the petrol prices were only going up and up. I remember about a couple of years back, the petroleum minister would announce, you know, through his Twitter, today petrol is down by 27 paise. But just say interestingly, in the last couple of months, you've seen it was only going up and up and up from 70 to more, almost 110 rupees a liter. And recently, a couple of days ago, it has come down by 8 to 9 rupees for probably for the petrol and 10 rupees for the digital. So would you call it really going down? But if you see the narrative in the media, say, now, you know, this is going to cost the government so much and it will be huge relief for the people. How can it be relief, you know, from 70 to 110 and then you just brought it slightly down? So this is the narrative I'm talking about. You don't talk about the cumulative, you know, the increase. You're talking about the decrease just by a few paise. So imagine, you know, when we talk about the importance of communication and media, you have to see the undercurrents within that also intelligently as a public policy student or researcher or somebody who is following it. Next, please. This, of course, we spoke. Most of the media is owned by controlled big business. Therefore, the media narrative cannot be independent, always honest and ethical. Next, please. So I'm just explaining that. Media setting the agenda. Many empirical studies reflect media's role in setting the agenda for initiating, changing, supporting a certain kind of discourse by priming and framing of issues. Which issues to be played up with? How do you frame them? So the entire public opinion works around that, you know. If you see more of the same, so obviously think that this must be the right. Then agenda setting refers to the idea that there's strong correlation between the emphasis that mass media places on certain issues based on relative placement or amount of the coverage and the importance attributed to these issues by mass audience. A lot of research in America, which happened about 30, 40 or 50 years ago, when the elections are happening. So when the media threw some issues in the public you know, domain, so these were discussed and they became the rallying point for the candidates who were contesting elections, and they became the agenda for the that election. And the more you know, somebody was talking about it, the more beneficial it was for him or her. Next. So in the watchdog function, one of the fundamental role of the media in a liberal democracy is to critically scrutinize government affairs, to act as the fourth estate of the government, ensure that the government can be held accountable. But in reality, however, media's role has come under huge scanner and question for supporting the powerful from the political and the corporate world. Very interestingly, because since I taught for long in a media school, so, and the media is owned by a lot of people. So I was just checking with one of my old students who are now in leadership position in the media. So I said, what happened? Because there's no empirical research to tell you the people who own the media, the corporate houses which own the media, what do they write about their own selves? And what do they camouflage about their own affairs? Because that media is owned by them, obviously they'll not write about that. But the other thing is that in their own media outlets, they would not write or would not allow it to be written. The rest of the media, the smaller ones, the medium-sized newspapers and the channels, most of them depend on advertising support. In fact, the newspaper which you get in your home, which costs you about 5 rupees, costs the company which brings out that newspaper almost 20-25 rupees. So who is paying for that 15 rupees? Obviously, it is subsidized by the advertisers. So when the corporate sector which advertises subsidizes it, so obviously, they have the power and the edit control. So you understand how the dynamics of the media is if you're following the public policy. Next, please. So big news media shape policies. The news media owned by big business houses is often seen as an active participant in the policymaking process, and its ability to stimulate change or maintain a status quo, depending on its choice of the subject of policy issues and how they frame. I would really like you now, because February is not very far off. So around the budget time, if you have been following it maybe last year, so around the budget time, you find the newspapers which are economic in nature, we also call them financial newspaper, generally have a budget, a dummy budget, before the finance minister is presenting a budget, and they call it people's budget, Janta budget. Now, who is making that Janta budget? And they keep telling you, we really do not know what the finance minister is going to do, but this is what we think is good for the nation. So you would have not known what the finance minister has made, because you find there's an interesting narrative and imagery. The finance minister with a nice leather, briefcase comes to the Parliament House, opens as if, there's a first timing opening, and then they read it. So my view, and I'm sure everybody who is a thinking person would know that lot of, I wouldn't say pressure, but there are lobbies, of course, is on the government to make it industry centric, to give them more and more benefits. And every government, and it's not only in India, elsewhere, when there was a pandemic, we saw how much money went to the corporate sector to bring it back on the economic wheels in America, Europe, India also. A lot of tax benefits were given to them. So this is how it happens, clandestinely for some, but people who are part of this understanding, they understand how it works. Next, please. Acha, this is over. Now let me give you a case study of this labor laws which I talked about, and how did we, I don't have a slide, but I thought I'll just chat with you on that. So you can remove that so that we can be face to face with each other. Okay. Can I see some faces also? Possible to see some faces?
Yes, ma'am. Why not? Please put on your video.
Yes. Oh, they're saving the electricity, or they are just dozing off. So did it make sense? Some people tell me on chat box. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Great. So let me tell you how, when something is happening as an academic, as a researcher, so how do you go about it? So this labor laws have just come about in there are 4 labor codes now. One is on the industrial relations, wages, and one is on the social security, and the fourth one is on the basically health, etc. So it has been on since almost 20 years when Mr. Bajpayee was the prime minister. So they set up a labor commission. They was set up a commission which they asked them that you could give us some suggestions on the labor laws. But there were hundreds of labor laws, both in the states and at the center. So the idea was that some of these, or most of these, were repetitive, and there were a problem of interpretation and all. So this work went on for a few years, and probably this labor commission submitted this proposal somewhere when the NDA government was in power till 2004. But then it went on back burner until 2014. And 2014, when they came back in power, so it was activated. And the best part about the policy making is that when a bill is being prepared, so they make those, one of the persons, not necessarily from the treasury benches, not necessarily from the party which is in the saddle, but from anywhere else, because there are a lot of parliamentary committees. So there's always a standing committee on a certain issue. So this standing committee was on labor, and the person who was heading it for three at least, one was a different person. He was from Orissa, from the Patnaik, that Biju Patnaik party, and a very, very brilliant guy, Bhartari Mehtab. So he along with, then they have about 20, 25 people who work, look at the bill threadbare to see, if they could give suggestions, they could give, their ideas. And in the meantime, the government has also put up that bill in the public domain for a month or so. And they get, as I said, hundreds, sometimes thousands of suggestions, so on and so forth. So, and then they invite the various stakeholders. So since I went through, this is my current fellowship research, so I really have seen it threadbare, how it works. So these people were invited and discussions were held. Since I was working on the media sector, wages are related issue, the media sector, so I got in touch with a lot of people who work in the media, the professional associations, and immediately they said, but we were not consulted. And you have, bodies which handle the media affairs. There are bodies which, look after the interests of the people who are the working journalists. So some of the insights which I got was, most of the media people did not even know that the two acts which were made somewhere in 1950s, one act was on the wages and related issues, of the journalists. Another was the working condition of journalists, which were two things were happening in the last 70 years, that the government would employ a wage board, which will look into almost every 10 years to see that how the wages of the people working in media could be enhanced, as we have in the government sector or the private sector. Every year we get a increase. This was not happening in the media, but somehow right from the beginning, if I have to give you a background, the media barons, again, they were big business houses, they did not like that idea. And they thought that, bringing out newspapers was the private entrepreneurship of some people. Why should government interfere in, putting the wage boards on our head? And they started getting into litigation. They would not give them, and as I told you, there's so many, more than lack of publications. Out of the 17,000 are newspapers. That time there were not so many, but these Times of India, Hindu, Indian Express, and sometimes were also there. They went to the court fighting against the wage board's existence. And the idea was that the government is trying to, appease the journalists so that they can write favorably. But that was not the case. So these two acts also were subsumed in these overarching labor laws. And most of the journalists told me that we did not even realize. It's only when the laws were passed that we knew that this is being done. So they started sending representations, they started doing dharnas here and there. But the argument of the government or the standing committee was, once a law is passed, as we are seeing in farmers, it cannot be taken back. You tell us what we can do within that law. So these laws are now at that stage, as I told you, that rules and guidelines are being made, but they have not been operationalized per se. And the worst part is that when I looked at the National Employment Register, the NSS, etc., you find that the working journalists have been clubbed together with, with writers and storytellers, so on and so. So they do not even have a niche in the National Employment Register. So when you look at the working of the media sector, and it really requires a policy intervention, because I work in a policy, institute. So my idea is that policy has to be, made in favor of the media guys. So these, if you look at how many people they employ, when you look at the our census 2011, you find that they're showing that just about 7,000 to 8,000 journalists working. Now, how can 7,000 to 8,000 people work in more than a lakh of publications? So I start thinking, how can it be such a wrong? The census cannot go wrong, but there was no money for guessing, which meant, that's my gut feel, there's no database to tell you how many people really work. So my gut feel, my inference is that these people must be permanent. Rest of the people must be on contract or working as stringers. So they work for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, so on and so forth. Imagine an institution which is so big, which is so important in a democracy, and we know about the world per se through media stimuli, and this is the kind of working conditions they live in. They look so powerful when you see them on television, but 99.9%, of course, there are 0.1% who get salaries as any corporate honcho would do, but an average journalist is not able to make even 2 ends meet. Their salary in a village would be almost nothing, but in a district level, not more than 15 to 20,000 in a month. He'll retire at 35,000, and then there may not be even any permanent kind of a employment arrangement with them. So all these things put together, and then I looked at all the 4 labor codes very, very, minutely, trying to see what it is and how can we help the media industry within those. So, and there's the first time probably that now gender as a word has been used. So one of the labor laws, the code says that there'll be gender equity in employment, but then it is silent on what happens when it comes promotions or sending people, women for, for training, and the special needs women may have, because our data says that many women lose their jobs when they go on maternity leave. So the law is silent on that. So keeping all those views, so I made a working paper and said that within that, how can we help the media industry? And the standing committee chairman, I organized a national webinar and involved a number of universities, media universities, and lo and behold, more than 1,500 people joined that webinar, including academicians, researchers, people from the government, Press Council of India, and Mr. Bhartari was there as our chairperson. He had the keynote address, and we were able to form a certain kind of an opinion or perception that despite now that these 2 acts have been subsumed, which are almost 70-year-old, now what can we do within? So one thing which we got a kind of a, I would say, promise or kind of assurance was that the government says that now, since the wage boards have become now redundant with the subsuming of these 2 acts, imagine how it works. These wage boards were there for 70 years with the merging of these acts, so it is no more relevant. So they said maybe a committee, whatever it may be called, but the government is thinking of having a kind of entity, a body, which will look into the wages and the working conditions. So my question is that they did not even listen to them for all these 70 years. They did not even listen to the Supreme Court of India. Out of 17,000 people, just about 300 odd, gave the wages as per the Majithia Commission. The rest have not. And their answer or the argument is that it will bleed us to death. We don't have that kind of a money. So media, which looks very powerful to you, they may have sometimes even issues of sustenance. But I will not take that argument because, as I said, when media is owned by big business houses, they look after their employees pretty well in the rest of their entities. Why not media? So I'm sure some of you would have got the answer. So when media is owned and controlled and acquired and seized, the reason may not necessarily be economic. The reason could be to create a certain of clout, a power position where you have, because you have the power to speak, you have the power to write, so you can, do the arm twisting the way you want. So imagine, though communication is so important, it is so, imperative, but then when it comes to their own space, it's not that easy. It's not that easy to, sustain themselves on a longer period. But the smaller and the newspapers, the medium-sized newspapers, they have other issues. They may, because they are not owned by big business houses, they depend for the sustenance on the advertising support. And where does the advertising support comes from? It generally comes from the government. The government is one of the biggest advertiser, runs into thousands of crores. So they also have to toe a certain line to be getting their ads. So when we talk about public policy, when we talk about the independence of media, it can be seen as a mirage. It can be seen as, a very difficult proposition. But then, all said and done, you cannot pursue a public policy. You cannot unless until you have a very robust communication system built around it. So probably now I'll invite questions. What do you say, Gaurika?
Yes, ma'am, that would be really good.
Yes, because there's something new for them. So I thought, let us give them a little more time to ask questions so that I can be.
No, ma'am, it was such an, interesting lecture. Even, every class which I take, I tell them that you should make this happen, that you should read one newspaper.
Very good.
I tell, yeah.
Whether they really buy newspapers, that's the whole problem. The youngsters.
No, I tell them you go to the, college library, all the newspapers are there. After your classes, you just make a habit, and this should be, religiously followed.
Yes. Are they students of public administration, no, Gaurika? All of them?
No, ma'am. Maximum they are from political science. Some of them are from
my subject.
Law. Yeah, our subject.
Yes, your subject too.
Yeah.
So you understand how important is media communication. Despite that, it's not that powerful as we think it to be. Yes.
So the floor is open for discussion. Please feel free to ask and please feel free to interact.
Good evening, ma'am.
Good evening.
Ma'am, I think I got the answer for the question that I am going to ask just before this. But still, ma'am, I wanted to ask that when we open any news channels or newspaper, we see oodles of advertisements and sponsorships. So, ma'am, how these sponsorships and advertisements affect the content of the news channels and papers, or the values or the context of there?
Good question. One is that you cannot sustain a channel without advertising support. That's a given. And the advertisements come through how many people you are able to reach. So the tariff is generally, is decided by the channel based on the eyeballs it is able to reach, the TRP, the TV rating points. But there's a huge scandal in that also. I'm sure you have watched last year how some of these companies, the TV companies were influencing the TRPs because in a huge country, 1.4, almost 4 billion people, and they have a couple of lakhs now. It used only 40,000, couple of lakhs of, it's called peopleometer or barometer. There are TV sets which are in, cross section of the houses, and what they are watching, it is monitored. Based on that, imagine 1.3 billion, people. They have a couple of lakhs of only barometers, which decide how many people are watching, and then you decide the tariff. How much would you get, for your advertisement? How much you have to pay for your advertisement? And some of these channels now, it is the case is sub judice. So what were they doing? They were probably going to those people and saying that you keep it on the entire day. You may have another TV, but this may be on. If it is on against the half an hour to 12 hours in a day, obviously the reach would be more. And only run those channels. And somebody, they found in Dharavi, so somebody was running an English channel. So obviously there's no money for guessing. They would have done a Marathi channel or a Hindi channel. They won't be watching an English channel. So there's a lot of dynamics in that. Two, how does it impact the edit control or the content of that channel? There are different kinds of channels. There are entertainment channels, there are info channels, there are news channels. So if you were to talk about news channels, there are about 400 channels, but the all the channels put together, do you have any guess how many people this is able to reach? Just give me a guess. 400 channels, 1.4 billion people. What percentage of people would be watching it? Just give me a guess. Don't worry.
Maybe 25%.
Okay. Good answer. But it does not reach more than 7 to 8% of the people in the entire country, all 400 channels. The channel which has the highest of TRPs is just about 1.1% or so. But it does not mean people don't watch news per se. They watch news, digital. They watch news on their mobile phones. They watch news on the YouTube. And whenever there's a critical time, like pandemic, they found that almost 60% people are watching channels. So it changes, In a normal circumstances, just about 7 to 8% people watch those typical idiot box, channel news. Like, for example, since I teach media, the news channel is on all the time in my house. And even in the office, whatever I'm doing, one channel is on. And I have, attuned myself to a system. I'm writing a paper, doing whatever it is. In the background, I'm also listening to news. So this has become a habit with me. Some people do that. I'm sure if you ask your grandmother or mother, tell you, there was a time All India Radio will be on in the household all the time, from morning till the evening, whatever else you are doing in your life. But this used to be on. So with me, a channel is like, but I keep on swapping the channels because it's not the same, because there's a lot of ideological driven, there's huge polarization. You know whose agenda they are setting, but you must be informed if you're a media academic. Yeah, did I answer?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay. Yes, wake up.
Please make this opportunity. Yeah, I'm telling them, utilize this opportunity. You will not get it again.
Yes, ma'am, I have a question.
Yes.
We all know that power is kind of attracts the worst and corrupts the best. We have all heard this, and whatever XYZ government comes in power tries to monopolize media in some form or another, like through big houses or directly. So it kind of affects the watchdog functions of the media. So what are your views on this?
As I said, media, the normative about media is to work as a conduit between the governors and the governed. That's a normative about media, to work as a watchdog, as an independent interpreter of events and all. But because media is as an institution, is not more than, if I say in terms of mass media, communication was always there. But as mass media, from the time when the first newspaper came, to the radio, to the television, to the digital media, it's not more than 100 odd years. But so much is the clout and power of the media and the power to carry your message through the media that in the last 100 years, it has become so powerful that it started questioning the age-old institutions, which were from the time they were Adam and Eve, They question everything. They set stereotypes, make new stereotypes. So imagine that power. So every government, I'm not talking about which color government, every government everywhere would like to have a positive media to their side, but it does not happen always. Let me give you a very interesting example around the COVID time. So when COVID was showing its dirty face in India, so media was required. And the Prime Minister of India, he held a digital conference with some topmost editors of the newspapers and channels, and told there's a huge pandemic. We all have to work together and see that the grapevine is not formed. There's not misinformation, misrepresentation of facts. So please work with the government. Obviously, I think it was an extremely good gesture on the part of the government to take the media along. Because when a disaster happens, it's not just the responsibility of the government per se to handle it. It's the responsibility of the civil society, the media, every institution, including every person. Even if you can change the life of one person, even as a citizen, you are responsible. So this was taken in a good stride. And if you recall, if you were watching, because most of you were locked down, were in a lockdown condition, we were watching nothing but TV. So in the beginning, there used to be a press conference in Delhi every day, in which the top information guy, called the Director General of PIB, Press Information Bureau, would be the moderator. You had this guy from the Health Ministry, then you had people from the medical AIMS and some other experts, researchers, and the journalists would be there. It was the media center, which is at next to Shastri Bhavan near the Parliament House. And every day at a fixed time, this used to happen, and we were also watching. But I found over a period of time, because I wrote a paper which is published in the Springer's, Gorika, you can share with them, which has come in that Springer book. So it was, looking at, the pandemic through the media lens. So when I was observing, I found that in the beginning, it was every day. After a month, the frequency came down. After a month, it was almost negligible. So what does the logic says, common sense says? When there's a crisis, there should be more information dissemination. But what was happening in this case? The crisis was going out of hand and information was very less from the government. It's not information was not there. What it means? Because media started when there was a reverse migration, the stories, the narratives of the people going on foot, some dying, getting cut under the rails when they were walking on the rail tracks, the people who were without water, without food, and you found good Samaritans like Sonu Sood getting into that picture. Somehow the government thought they were losing the narrative because the news wasn't good for the government. But then you found there was a lot of work, and then you found the second phase, the condition of Delhi. People are dying because lack of oxygen, because we have a lot of doctors in my family, and found how difficult it was for them to handle one doctor looking after 200 people. And all the doctors in my family, all of them contracted COVID. Thank God they survived. All young people, 26, 27, 28, like that. Everybody got COVID while working the COVID, centers. So this was the situation. Obviously, an independent media would reflect the facts. But the other side of the argument is that when the going is not good, there's a lot of, chaos around, and people are, seeing with their own eyes, but then media is only, amplifying it. So it becomes a problem for the government's reputation. So you would have found again and again the government would say, but what would the people say abroad? What is the reputation of India? Now, is reputation important or saving the people important? I want you to take your own call. I have no comments on that. But then media did this, most of the media. And you know what happens when the issue is not very big? Some media were covering, other media were not covering. I saw that. But when the issue went really out of hand, and when the people were, even we saw in the farmers, when these media guys were not covering them, according to them, it could be right or wrong. So they were being booed that you're not covering, you're all Godi media. So the people also have a point of view. And in a time when there is a direct telecast from the field, you can't edit it even per se. So you know what is the ground reality. So media does not have much option. So you found the media, which was not very critical, also had to get into the field and bring the stories. So it became terrible for the government. They thought that it was really, really bad reputation for them, which it was. There's no doubt. But my personal view is that when there's a crisis, nobody's going to give you bouquets. You do your job honestly and see the feedback later. It's not a time to look at the feedback. And then, we knew that the people who were covering, some of them were booked. FIRs were, filed against some journalists that you are spreading misinformation, disinformation, and you are misrepresenting facts. Some of them are still in the jail. So this is the problem. And it's not that any government anywhere, but this became absolutely out of hand in India, But then the things were going fine when the vaccines, and nobody thought that India, because the government was saying that we would be able to vaccinate 100 crores by December, and there was speculation, it was making fun of it, but they did it. So you find that the government was able to, and we have not even reached December. We already have reached more than 100 crores, 108 crores. So what really happens with the media is that it is event driven. When something goes wrong, as I said, good news is no news, bad news is good news. So they will really amplify it. But when things improve, you hardly find that narrative, because they want to show that they're independent and they have ideological issues also. So media has become a player in the sordid drama of politics, what happens around, which is the unfortunate part. And media is seen not as a partner, but as an adversary by any government. I mean, the color is not important at all, because they see that it's because of media, people get to know. And sometimes media may also have vested interest. They may be amplifying wrong things. So it's not that easy to, understand media, understand the dynamics, the undercurrents in the media. But all said and done, at least we get to know what is happening around. That's why I always say, Gorika told you to read one newspaper, I'll tell you to read 3 newspapers. Look at least 3 newspapers. And there's no money for guessing when you start reading. And what should you read? Not just the front page or the sports page. What you should read is the edit page, which has editorial and opinionated articles. In edit page, you know where that newspaper stands in terms of ideology. And the opinionated, they generally have invited people. And nowadays, I don't know why they have started getting a lot of politicos to write about it. Today, this one party, next it will be another party. But it's okay. At least we get to know that. So read 3 newspapers and watch also 3 channels, whatever, whenever you have a mood to watch. And if you're political science students, law students, public administration students, you have no choice but to, watch. You have to be really voracious consumers of media. I watch a lot of trash also, because when I teach popular culture, when I teach advertising, I cannot teach unless until I watch trash. So for me, the TV is on at least 12 to 14 hours in a day. I keep watching all the time. Yes, there are no women asking questions. How many girls are there in the? How many girls are there in the group?
There are many girls, ma'am.
So
Sorry, I wanted to say something.
Yes.
Ma'am, I just wanted to say that sometimes it becomes hard, ma'am, to grasp things from the news channel, because I see that this is going wrong. So my mind becomes like, okay, no, like I get depressed and sometimes something like that. So sometimes it becomes hard, ma'am, to grasp.
Yes, I know. At your age, but if you can think like that, you're a thinking person. Even we get very diffident at times, but then, sometimes we feel very bad, we become very emotional, but then that is a sign of a thinking person. We should not be dodos. It's very important for us to think, even if we feel emotional, cry sometimes, feel bad about it, and that is how we can bring about change. It's very important to be emotional, but don't stop watching. What we do when we think that, oh, it's not going the way I would like to, I just stop, shut off. Don't shut off from what is happening around.
Okay.
Saurya
Yes.
is from Calcutta, ma'am.
Yes.
Yeah, Kirti, please.
So you talked about power of communication, and it sometimes happens that in that power of communication, certain communities and groups of people are targeted.
Yes.
And what are your views on that? Their privacies are breached, and
well, that is a problem, not just in everywhere. Look at, the people, the internet, those OTT platforms and all, they were supposed to be news aggregators, have become media unto themselves. If you look at the social media platforms, because, recently you would have seen that Mark Zuckerberg has come under huge scanner. They were even invited in the Senate, in the Congress, to explain, because it has become a huge, hate mongering. And some women said that even there's a body shaming going on. So I will not go specifically which communities and all, but generally media plays on that, and digital media has become a hotbed for that. And digital media probably is the least regulated. We have certain IT rules now, which you would have seen, they're still under discussion. So I feel that as you have so many United Nations organizations on various things. You need a regulated international media. It has become so dangerous and we are so addicted to it. Can we think of life without a net? Can we think of life without a mobile phone? But what it is doing to our lives? Look at the way, look at the way, look at the way there's a trolling going on of journalists, the people who write, which is against the vested interests of people. It is not anybody's guess. It's so difficult for women, it's so difficult for children to survive. Look at the predators, who are there, who are hoodwinking young children. Look at the kind of content which is there. So a lot needs to be done. Hatred towards one community is a very small portion of the bigger picture what we are watching. So a lot needs to be done. And and the interesting part was, it was from the Facebook's internal documents, which were probably leaked, and they said that, and the person who was in charge said that, when there's a negative story, it is amplified more than, that is how their software picks up more than the positive stories, and it becomes huge hate mongering. So as young people, you should be worried about that. You think about how to do in case each one of us changes our own self. I think we should the change which we are looking into others. But things are not good, and media has a lot to answer that. A lot to answer. Yeah.
Ma'am.
Yes.
So like you talked about media trial. So I was wondering, since like a lot of the news, like even like the Aryan Khan case, they usually portray the person as guilty already.
Yes.
So like in such cases, like how do you tackle media trial? I mean, apart from defamation suits or anything.
Okay. Yes. Defamation suit is the one thing you can do as a civil society person. When it was happening in case of Shilpa Shetty and her husband, so she moved the court, and the court said, well, you cannot have a general kind of a censure on the media. But then they issued a general advisory saying that because they were, you would have seen that while they're talking about one person, on the other hand, there's a window where Shilpa Shetty's pictures are coming. She's doing yoga, she's doing that. You saw in Ria's case, also, and even in the Aryan case. So one is that the right of freedom of speech, which is granted to the media, like there is no special grant to the media on speech and expression, Article 19, which is as anybody has, as any citizen has. So they have to be very careful about themselves. But the Supreme Court, or was it the High Court, they declined to say that we'd have a blanket censor on that. But they said that what doesn't concern the person, you should not be. And then she pleaded that there's a question of my children, the young children, and my own privacy. And you found it came down a bit after that. She was very smart to appeal to them directly. In the case of Aryan case, and we know that the wheels within wheels, now after a long time, he's come back on bail. But again, there's another SIT. Again, he's facing the same trial, which is so unfortunate. He had enough of it for 28 days. Now that case has gone away from Mr. A, it has gone to Mr. B now. So again, the whole process goes. So one really, and there's so much of politics in that. You're seeing, what all the minister had to say, and that he says it was a kidnapping, extortion, it was not that question. So one really doesn't know. It has become, but the media trial is one thing which, as a citizen, I don't approve of. It is okay that you inform, educate, give insights, but you can't go on playing it again and again, amplifying it, but that is what is happening. That is what the mainstream news channels have become, except for a few, very honorable one or two of them. That's how it works. That's what people want to watch. So the privacy is a huge issue, invasion of privacy, a huge issue in India. But then as a society, we are generally very passive. We don't question. Only if we become very active, go on, filing suits against them, but so expensive going to the court, things will not change. In America, and it is, at least I was reading in UK, there are a lot of media, which is following the celebrities. So the celebrities have lawyers and and media people as a team working for them. So anytime something is written against a celebrity, immediately a suit is filed against them. and then you find it is out of court settlement. So they become very, very active there. I don't find that much here, but sometimes you don't even get to know in the media. But a lot of defamation suits are going from the celebrities, people who matter, against the people who might sully their names. Yeah.
All right, ma'am. Thank you.
We have a very senior participant also. So I was thinking, people, how can we have more media literacy among the general citizens?
Very good question. Very good question. Very good question. A lot of people are, seized of this media literacy as a subject now. I think NCERT started a few years ago. As children, we must tell them, as you know, I'm telling you a lot of dynamics of media. Not an average student does not understand what to watch, what not to watch. There are a lot of software also. So media literacy should be made part of the curricula of every school, every college, and not just media schools per se. Everybody must understand how to use media, how not to be misinformed, how not to be, misrepresent. But at least these things we are talking. We were not even talking about it. Remember when the satellite communication came in India, so schools were very worried about that because they were showing Baywatch and all those kinds of programs. I recall DPS had invited me in Artipuram to talk to the students, a kind of media literacy. So when the teacher wasn't there, I said, do you watch TV? They said the mom doesn't allow. So what do you do? So some of the students were honest to say, they tell their moms they're going out for playing, which the mom was very happy, but they would end up going to a friend's house, which didn't have a mom around, a working mom, and they were watching what they wanted to watch. So this is something you cannot, and this is a process of growing up also for children. But my problem is not, could be, you can say, adult, narrative, which children would learn anyway. It is the hate mongering and other things which children should not be exposed to. That is what, vitiates their mind. Talking about girl issues, boy issues, is okay. One day they would start talking themselves. But what is the hate mongering and the conceit and all which you see, which is very dangerous, for the young minds.
I also have a question. How can the adult citizens or civil society groups, the media literacy for adults in this age of post-truth?
So I'm sure
that's a democratic skill. That's a democratic
I know. I think adults are smart enough themselves because but sometimes adults are judgmental. They should not be judgmental about children, As when the children grow, every child undergoes the same peer pressures as we have gone during our age. And there's a learning process also. We must leave them, trust their choices, and they come out of it. And but most of the parents are very judgmental. We should not be. And media, there was a time, I remember research was done that TV has replaced Nani and Dadi, because Nani and Dadi, they used to tell stories. Now media is telling the stories. But then where are the Nani Dadis now, And media is no more a Nani Dadi. Had it been a Nani Dadi, things would have been still better.
No, so, I am talking about the adult citizens who are do they know who owns the media, who gives advertisements,
yes,
and who are projected as adversaries? Maybe it is communist. I am reminded about Chomsky's Manufacturing Consent.
So you read it? What a great book.
Yeah. So so I am wondering how many people know about it, adult population. They get stuck up with one newspaper which they have been traditionally reading, and it goes on in the family.
As the gospel of truth, yes. But somehow I find that, people have a lot of native intelligence. And whatever we say in the last 70 odd years, we had 17 parliamentary elections, hundreds of state elections, thousands of panchayat elections. We have brought about a change. So whatever happens, the native intelligence is there, the group stimuli is there. And media only, to my mind, is only reinforcing what? And media is not very different from the society is. Media is part of society. It's not something which has come from the Mars. Because if there is a corruption society, if you are bad in society, the same is reflected. But who influences whom is the media influence society, society influences media, is a moot point. But they are not two different entities. That's what I feel.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy. But you are an academic, so obviously you raised a very relevant question. And you read Chomsky. What else?
Professor Nina is part of NAPSPAC for a very long time, and she's been attending all these lectures which are going.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
So maybe we close and there are no questions now.
Yes, ma'am, we can. If there are no questions, if there are no further questions, can we close?
And you can share the PPT with them.
Yes, ma'am.
And tomorrow, same time, we'll talk on advocacy.
Okay, ma'am. So, Kirti, over to you.
Okay, so firstly, I would like to start by thanking Jayashree ma'am for such a wonderful, interesting, and insightful lecture. And now I would also like to thank all the participants for joining the lecture. We'll see you tomorrow at the same time to the next lecture. Thank you.
Kirti, I like your hair, metrosexual. All right. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye. See you tomorrow.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Jayashree ma'am. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for the wonderful lecture.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Nina ji.